Hello, and today we're going to be making, well, I say we, me, not the dogs. We're going to be making this pattern, but with an interesting Alice in Wonderland twist. I chose it because I really wanted to do something with kind of a Valentine's Day theme, but that would work for the rest of the year, but not just wear it on Valentine's night for a night in with the dogs. So the theme that I chose was from one of my favourite gothic fairy tales, Alice in Wonderland, and I thought of the Queen of Hearts. Now, my favourite character from Alice in Wonderland, and I'm sure a lot of people's, was definitely the White Rabbit. So what I thought was I want the White Rabbit and I want the playing card theme. So I thought I'll look for a dress pattern that has a bodice where I can do an applique, no, not collie, I can do an applique white rabbit, and I wanted to use this design from Alice in Wonderland of the White Rabbit. I think it's when he's announcing the, was it croquet dogs? It might have been croquet, with his flag under his little trumpet with the hearts. So I wanted him on the bodice, and then I wanted a skirt that would have 4 panels for the 4 playing cards, the hearts, the diamonds, the spades and the clubs. So I narrowed it down to 2 patterns, and then down to this pattern from 1940. And the reason I chose it is because it's got these 4 panels. I'll do a playing card, 2 playing cards at the front and 2 at the back. And it had this, they call it a plastron, it's like a bib at the front of the dress. So similar actually to the Art Deco 30s dress I made. So I thought the plastron bib would form like a good sort of panel to put my White Rabbit on, and I wanted to do this version, the version with the long sleeves, because after all Valentine's is in February where it's jolly chilly, so I thought I'll do that version. But I also wanted to just keep the thrill from the short sleeve version, because I quite like the way, if I'm doing a White Rabbit here, it'd be quite nice to have a frame around him. So there's the applique. I'm going to do it in velveteen, like a cotton velvet, because velveteen is still washable, but it has lovely kind of glowing colours. And I think velveteen, to me, it's one of those fabrics that you can wear it in the daytime as well as the evening. And this is a really interesting pattern because, can I just have my arm back? The interesting feature about it is that the shape, well, it's 1940, so early on in the war years. So it still has, you can see on the short sleeve, it's still quite puffy sleeves, but also shoulder pads that kind of extend the shoulder, and then the shape, there's a lot of interesting shaping, and it's interesting because it's all done on this pattern with tucks. There are tucks everywhere, so the most evident ones are at the waist, but there's also tucks at the shoulder, just one tuck here either side, just to kind of create that look where she's kind of wearing a dress clip in the picture, which is a lovely idea, or there's a kind of bow on the other side. I mean, I've already going to have my my White Rabbit with his trumpet, so maybe a dress clip might be a bit extra. Still nothing wrong with that. So tucks on the waist, tucks on the upper bodice, tucks on the sleeve head, and tucks at the elbow to give the sleeves a shape, a certain shape. So yeah, it was quite fascinating, and the sleeve head tucks really create, you'll see, that sort of like puffy, exaggerated shape. So Yeah, the main dress considered white because obviously the background of playing cards is white, but white is just not it's one, it doesn't suit me, and two, it's not the most practical colour for a dress either. So I'm going to do the whole dress in red velveteen, and then I'm going to do my white rabbit on the bodice, and then a playing card on each panel of the skirt. I started by laying out the pattern pieces, measuring to make sure that they were on the straight of the grain before cutting them out. And I just wanted to show you how many markings for tailor's tacks there were on these pattern pieces, and that is because there are so many tucks on the dress. I'm just showing you here the plastron, or the sort of bib shape that you can see on the dress. And for each pattern piece, the instructions were very specific about whether you needed to make the tucks from the outside, as the instructions put it, i.e. the right side, or to make the tucks from the inside, i.e. the wrong side, to create obviously tucks that will look a certain way. Just showing you the sleeve head instructions with the tucks or pleats folded from the outside, and just a vision of how many tailor's tacks I had to do. There is the plastron and the sleeve with the pleats or tucks at the elbows and the sleeve head, and there is the plastron with the tucks or pleats pinned from the outside, and that's the sleeve head with the tucks or pleats pinned in place too. I bought a pleated chiffon binding for the dress because although I'm doing the long sleeve version, I want to do the version 2 thrill around the plastron, and I think the white and black will echo the applique that I'm going to put on. So I started by drawing out my white rabbit on the back of an envelope and cutting him out of the envelope, and then cutting him out of white velveteen, and then I went on to the back of the bodice, sewing in the pleats at the waistline and the neckline. And here I'm stitching the tucks on the plastron, and they're just stitched part way up the plastron along the markings made by the tailor's tacks. My old singer wasn't desperately keen on the velveteen, although I did wonder too whether I just need to buy the sharper needle. It did struggle a little bit. And then, having stitched the tucks in place, I pinned my chiffon pleated thrill around the edge, ready to stitch that in place too. And when I came to look for the instructions, I found Raisin Rabbit lying on the sofa, contemplating them. So I overlooked around all the edges of the pattern pieces because velveteen not so much frays as crumbles away at the edges. And here I have the back, the side front pieces, and then the plastron with the frill will just fit over the top there. And the back, I've just turned the back right side up, and that has a strip cut for the centre back, which is going to form the facing for the zip. So I pin that in place and then mark a centre line with tailor's chalk down along the wrong side of the facing, and that is where the zip is going to be positioned. And then I stitch either side of that chalk line, starting 6mm away from the top and tapering to a point at the lower end, and then place the zip over that line just to check the length. And then I cut down both the bodice back and the facing. I'm just cut down nearly to the kind of lower edge with my larger scissors, and then I swap over to my little sharp pointy scissors just right at the very end to make sure that I can get into that point. And then I turn the facing inwards to the wrong side of the dress, and you can see how this is now going to form the facing for the zip, and then the zip is stitched in place, making sure that it's turned the right side around, and here it is stitched in place on the dress. And I've also stitched some bias binding around the neck edge, also following the pattern instructions, and that's just then going to be slip stitched around on the wrong side. And then this is the top of the dress stitched together with the frill sandwiched between the sunfry pieces and the plastron, and the pins you can see are just holding the bias binding that finishes the neck edge in place. I stitched the side seams, and you can see that I have left a gap on the left side for a side zip. This dress has 2 zippers, and I'm just checking that my white velveteen rabbit applique is going to fit nicely onto the plastron, and then I'm onto the skirt. Then I stitched the centre front of the skirt seam, as you can see, just pointing out on the pattern where someone had written centre front seam. And after I stitched it, it didn't look like it should in the pattern instructions, which you can see here. The shape of the skirt is different. I have stitched along the wrong seam. It definitely should be the other way around, and in fact the centre front seam is labelled correctly on the pattern layout instructions. It's just that somebody has written centre front seam in the wrong place. How annoying when you stitched velveteen that crumbles away under your fingers, let alone when you have to unpick it. So I'm firmly writing centre front seam where it should be, because if I come to do this pattern again, which I'm not, I do like the pattern, even though I'm now feeling a little bit cross, gingerly unpicking that seam here. And here is the skirt front with the centre seam stitched correctly, with the centre, as you can see, it's just kind of higher up, and I guess that isn't what you necessarily expect, which is why that person had written centre front seam in the wrong place. But in fact, what is going to happen is I'm putting a little trim here to show you, because that's going to go around the pocket, and I might just give you a little reminder of the pattern again. So the trimming will appear at the top of the pocket, but it's sandwiched in place by the inner pocket, which is then turned to the back of the skirt. And then there is also an upper pocket, which is stitched around, and as you can see, raises the skirt at the edges. And just showing you, apologies for the light conditions, evening had fallen, but this is how the upper pocket fits over that inside lower pocket, and then you stitch around those pocket edges, and once you turn the skirt over to the right side, you can then see how it will look, and then you can put your hand into it. The next stage was to put the sleeves into the armholes at the top. So the tucks, or the pleats as the pattern called them, are pinned in place but not stitched. They're caught into that seam that I've just stitched here, and you can see that creates that high puffy shape at the top. And I made these shoulder pads that you can see, but I actually made different ones later, because when I pushed them in, as you can see here, the fullness of this sleeve is right at the top. It's not at the sides at all, it's just puffy at the top. So I actually changed those shoulder pads to make them into bolster shaped shoulder pads that would, or perhaps be better to say sleeve supports, because they're not in the shoulder, they're just right stitched onto the edge of that armhole seam, just at the very top. So those were the shoulder pads that I initially made, but when I put them in, I had my doubts and I actually took them apart a bit and made them into a bolster shape. And with the top complete, I just needed to slip stitch the bias binding in place and then join the top to the skirt. And those are the tucks stitched at the elbow to give the sleeves shape. Then I cut out all the applique shapes that I would need. So the white rabbit, 4 plain cards out of white velveteen, and then clubs, diamonds, hearts, and an ace of spades from red and black velveteen. And then I went round the edges of all my velveteen shapes, the white rabbit obviously, but also all those little clubs, everything with fray check. And that is because velveteen does really crumble away at the edges. And before I stitched my white rabbit to the bodice, I used a black stranded cotton thread separating 3 strands for the needle. And I just went round sort of freestyle, but looking at an original illustration to create the lines of his ears and his eye and his trumpet with his flag and his Elizabethan ruffled collar that he wears and his fancy bow. And of course he wears a little tabard as well. And I made just little short running stitches mainly, and little kind of one-off straight stitches to form his fur. And then I also positioned red velveteen hearts onto the white rabbit's tabard, and I'm going to then slip stitch those down. And he also needed a red velveteen heart on the flag, which is attached to his trumpet as he's announcing the Queen of Hearts croquet match. And then with all the appliques stitched onto the dress, it's complete. I'm wearing it with a little velvet pixie hat decorated with velvet red hearts, and the whole ensemble is, I'm relieved to say, just as I pictured it. Though it does put me in mind of that TikTok video, you know, the one that says, if I turned up on a date like this, what would you do? Oh, and I also made a matching velveteen belt with a mother of pearl buckle. Thank you so much for watching me, and I hope that you will like this video, and please consider subscribing, and I'll see you for more sewing adventures.